This is my true story. When my wife died, my only reason to live was my son. But one night, he vanished without a word. No note, no reason, just gone. For 25 years, I searched, prayed, begged for a sign, nothing. People told me to move on, but how does a father stop waiting for his child? I grew old with unanswered questions and an empty chair at the table. Then one morning, a letter arrived, from the son I thought I'd lost forever. But when I read the last line, my heart froze. Before I tell you what it said, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. 25 years is a long time to live with silence. Too long for a father who once heard his son's laughter echo through the walls every morning. When he vanished, it was as if someone had ripped the sound out of my life. The house went quiet overnight. His room stayed the same, bed made, clothes still folded, the last glass of water he drank still on the bedside table. I remember walking into his room the next morning and feeling something heavy in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was emptiness. A kind of emptiness you can't explain, only feel. The kind that sits in your bones and never leaves. In the first few weeks I searched everywhere, police, neighbors, hospitals, anyone who might have seen him. Every door I knocked on gave me the same answer. Nothing, no trace, no clue. I went to the bus station, asked every driver, every ticket clerk, if they had seen a boy with his face, his name, his nervous smile. I showed them his picture so many times that the edges started to tear. I printed new ones. I never stopped searching. My wife cried every night, her tears soaking the pillow until dawn. She blamed herself. She said maybe she was too strict, maybe she said something that hurt him, but I knew it wasn't her fault. He loved his mother more than anything. He wouldn't have just disappeared without reason. That thought kept me awake every night, the why that never got answered. As months turned into years, hope became a strange kind of pain. It didn't fade, it just changed shape. I stopped expecting a phone call or a knock on the door, but I never stopped leaving the porch light on. Every birthday, every holiday, I set an extra plate on the table, one for him. My wife used to tell me to stop, that it was time to accept he wasn't coming home. But how can a father accept that? I used to tell her, he's out there, he'll come back when he's ready. I said it so many times that I started saying it just to hear myself believe it. The years took her first. She died with his name on her lips. I still remember the last thing she said. If he ever comes back, tell him I forgave him. Those words stayed with me like a weight on my chest. After her funeral, I kept going to the same places, asking the same questions, even though everyone around me stopped believing. People moved on, friends stopped visiting, neighbors stopped asking. They thought I was living in denial. Maybe I was. But a father's denial is just another word for love that doesn't know where to go. As time passed, I aged. My hair turned gray, my hands weaker, but my heart never stopped waiting. I learned to live with silence, the kind that follows you from room to room. The sound of clocks ticking became my company. The house started to feel smaller. The nights got colder. I talked to his photograph every morning, the one of him smiling on his graduation day. I told him things as if he could hear me. What I cooked, how the garden looked, how his mother's roses still bloomed. I asked him every day, "Where are you, son?" The walls never answered. There were days when I thought about giving up, selling the house, moving somewhere new, trying to forget. But then I'd see something, a boy on the street with the same hair, a man on the bus with the same walk, and for a second, I'd feel my heart race again. I chased shadows for years, mistaking strangers for him. Every false hope cut deeper than the last. But I never stopped. I couldn't. Because the love of a parent doesn't end with distance. It doesn't die with silence. It just waits. Endlessly, quietly, painfully. By the 25th year, I had stopped speaking about him out loud. People got tired of hearing the same story. I became the old man who still waits. But deep down, I didn't care what anyone said. I knew what I felt. Somewhere in this world, my son was still breathing. And as long as he was, I would wait. Even if I died waiting, I would still keep that space in my heart open for him. And then one morning, after decades of silence, something changed. I woke up to the sound of the mailman sliding an envelope under my door. Just one small, faded envelope. Nothing special about it. But when I saw the handwriting, my hands started shaking. It was familiar. It was his. After 25 years of silence, my son had finally spoken, not in person, not with his voice, but through a letter that carried every tear I had shed all those years. The envelope was old, the edges torn, and the paper inside yellowed like it had been waiting as long as I had. I held it for a long time before opening it. My hands trembled. My heart thudded against my chest like it was trying to break out. I traced my fingers over the handwriting, shaky, familiar, the same way he used to write his school notes when he was young. Every letter of his name hit me like a wave. I whispered it softly under my breath, afraid that if I said it too loud, it might disappear again, just like he did. For 25 years, I had imagined this moment, how it would feel to finally hear from him. But nothing could prepare me for the mix of pain and hope that hit me all at once. I didn't open it right away. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he used to do his homework, the same chair where his mother would sit and talk about her dreams for him. The letter sat in front of me like a ghost, silent but powerful. I stared at it for hours. I made tea, but I couldn't drink it. I picked up the envelope, put it down, picked it up again. My hands were too unsteady to tear it open. What if it wasn't really from him? What if it was another cruel mistake, another false hope? I'd been through that before. Wrong names, wrong addresses, people saying they saw him when they didn't. I couldn't take another heartbreak. But the handwriting was his. I knew it. No one could fake that uneven slope of letters, that slight curve in the D of my name. It was him. It had to be. I finally gathered the courage and tore it open slowly, as if the sound of paper ripping would wake something sacred. Inside was a single folded page, creased and worn. I could tell it had been opened and closed many times before. Maybe he had written it years ago. Maybe he had carried it with him for a long time before sending it. The thought made my chest tighten. There was no return address, no city name, no clue about where it came from. Just a postmark that was too faint to read, and a small hand-drawn heart beside my name. That heart broke me. My son used to draw that same heart at the end of every birthday card he made as a child. I ran my fingers over it again and again, remembering the little boy who used to hug me every night before bed. The boy who promised he'd never leave me. And now, after all those years, here he was. Not standing in front of me, but reaching out through this letter. I unfolded the paper slowly, and before I even read the words, I noticed something that made me freeze. There were faint marks where the ink had smudged. Tears. His tears. I could see them dried into the paper, small circles of pain that said more than any sentence could. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook so hard that I almost dropped the page. My eyes burned before I had even read a single word. When I finally started reading, the first thing I saw was my name. Dad. Just that one word made me break down. It had been 25 years since anyone called me that I whispered it back to the empty room, my voice cracking. The sound of that word filled the silence that had haunted this house for decades. I couldn't read further right away. I had to stop and gather myself. Every line that followed would be another wound reopened. I knew that, but I needed to hear his voice, even if it was written in ink. I looked around the kitchen, the photographs, the old calendar still marked with his birthday, the faded curtains my wife once loved. Everything felt alive again for the first time in years. My heart was racing, my breath uneven, but I didn't care. After all the waiting, all the sleepless nights, all the prayers and pain, I finally had something real. A message. A sign. Proof that he was still somewhere out there. The letter felt heavy in my hands, not because of the paper, but because of the years it carried. 25 years of silence, guilt, and distance, sealed in one envelope. I didn't know what the words would say yet. I didn't know if they'd heal me or break me, but I knew one thing. My son was alive. And for a father who had been living with emptiness for half his life, That was enough to make the world stop spinning for a moment. I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes, and prepared myself to read his words. I didn't know that what waited inside that page would crush me in a way I had never been crushed before. The first line of the letter started simple. "Dad, you must be surprised to hear from me after all these years." My eyes stopped right there. The word "Dad" hit me like a punch in the chest. I hadn't heard it spoken or written in 25 years. It was more than just a word. It was a reminder of everything I'd lost, every birthday, every hug, every conversation that never happened. I sat there, reading that line over and over, unable to move forward. Then I forced myself to continue. He wrote about how he left because he thought I didn't love him anymore. He said he believed my silence meant disappointment, that I was ashamed of him. My throat closed up reading those words. I had never stopped loving him, not for 1 second. But he had lived all those years thinking I did. That realization broke me more than his leaving ever did. He said he was young, foolish, and scared. That he made mistakes he didn't know how to fix. He wrote that he thought running away would spare me the shame of having a failure for a son. I could almost see him, 20 years younger, confused, lost, trying to make sense of the world without guidance. I had no idea that my own silence had hurt him so deeply. I thought I was giving him space, letting him learn his own way. I thought being strict when he made bad choices would teach him responsibility. But all it taught him was distance. He mistook my discipline for rejection, my quiet for disappointment. And that misunderstanding grew until it swallowed him whole. He wrote about how he had wanted to come home so many times, but was too afraid. He said he used to walk past our old street just to look at the house from a distance. He said he once saw me sitting on the porch alone and wanted to call out my name but couldn't make his voice work. Reading that made my heart twist. He had been so close, close enough to see me, close enough to come back, and yet still too broken inside to step forward. I imagined him standing there, watching from across the road, his heart full of guilt, while mine was full of longing. We were both waiting for each other, trapped by pride and pain. He wrote that he saw the obituary when his mother died. He said he was living somewhere far away at the time, and when he saw her name printed in black ink, he broke down. He said he went to the funeral, but stood far back where I couldn't see him. He watched as they lowered her into the ground. He said he wanted to fall to his knees beside me but didn't have the courage. That sentence shattered me. All these years, I had thought he didn't care, that he had moved on without a thought. But he had been there, watching mourning, hurting, alone. He said he blamed himself for her death, that the grief I carried must have turned into hate. He believed he had ruined everything, that his running away had killed the family we once were. He said, "I thought if I stayed gone, maybe you could heal." That one line broke something deep inside me. All this time, I had been blaming him for leaving, but now I realized he had left because he thought it was the only way to protect us from himself. I kept reading, my eyes burning, my tears falling onto the paper. He said he had built a small life somewhere, nothing big, nothing fancy, just work, food, and a quiet room. He said he never married, never had children, because he couldn't imagine being a father when he thought he'd failed as a son. He wrote that every time he saw a father and son walking together, it felt like a knife twisting in his heart. He said he wished every day he could undo what he did. But life doesn't give that chance to everyone. By the time I reached the end of that page, my chest felt heavy, like a weight was pressing down on it. My heart hurt in a way I didn't think it still could. I had lived with pain for decades, but this was different. This was the pain of truth, of realizing that love can get lost, not because it dies, but because it goes unheard. My son hadn't stopped loving me. He had just stopped believing that I loved him. And that was the cruelest part of all. I wiped my tears and turned to the next page, my hands shaking. What I read next would show me the life my son had lived, a life built on guilt, loneliness, and a longing that never ended. The next part of the letter tore through me like a knife. He wrote about the life he lived after he disappeared, a life that sounded more like punishment than living. He said he left the city with nothing but a backpack and a few dollars. For a while he slept on park benches and bus stations, afraid to use his real name. He said he worked odd jobs, washing dishes, cleaning garages, doing whatever he could to survive. He said the nights were the hardest. He'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about home. He said every sound reminded him of the life he left behind. The ticking clock in our kitchen, his mother humming while cooking, me reading the newspaper on the porch. He said those sounds haunted him more than hunger ever did. He wrote that there were times when he almost came back. Once, during the winter of his first year away, he said he walked to a phone booth with trembling hands and dialed our number. He listened to it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. He said when he heard my voice on the answering machine, his throat closed up. He couldn't speak. He hung up and stood there crying in the cold. He said that moment stayed with him for years. He wrote that he hated himself for not saying something, for not letting me know he was alive. But he said shame grows fast, faster than courage. Every year that passed made it harder to come home. He said he used to check the newspapers sometimes, hoping to see something, anything, about me or his mother. Then one day he did. It was her obituary. He said he saw her photo and collapsed. He wrote that he didn't eat for days after that. He couldn't forgive himself for not being there, for missing her last moments. He said he came to the funeral, but stayed far in the back, behind the trees. He watched me cry. He said seeing me like that destroyed him. He said he wanted to run to me, to say, "I'm here." But the guilt held him like chains. He said he watched until the crowd left, and when I walked away, he stayed, standing in the rain, talking to her grave. He said he told her he was sorry, that he wasn't the son she deserved. He said he promised her he'd take care of me from afar, even if I never saw him again. He said after that, he couldn't stay in the same city. The memories were too heavy. He moved around, small towns, cheap rooms, jobs that didn't ask questions. He said people asked him sometimes if he had family, and he always said no. He said the lie hurt every time it left his mouth. He said there were days when he'd walk by families laughing together, and it would hit him so hard he'd have to stop walking. He said he'd sit on benches watching fathers with their sons, wondering what I was doing at that moment, if I still thought of him, if I still cared. He wrote that he started sending money through charity envelopes, anonymous donations to our old neighborhood. He said it made him feel close to us somehow. He never signed his name, but he hoped I'd know. I remembered receiving envelopes of money after his mother died. No name, no message. I never guessed they were from him. I thought they were mistakes. But now I knew, all those years, he was there, hidden behind shadows, helping quietly while living with guilt that never left. He said he found a job that paid enough to live decently. He said it wasn't much, but it gave him food and a small room where he could finally sleep without fear. But peace never came. He said the guilt stayed. It lived with him, ate with him, followed him everywhere. He said he'd dream of home, the smell of his mother's cooking, the sound of my voice calling his name. And then he'd wake up to silence. He said silence became his punishment, his reminder of what he lost. He said he thought about writing for years, but couldn't bring himself to. He said he wrote hundreds of letters, tore them up, and burned them. He said every letter ended the same way. I miss you, but I'm too ashamed to return. Reading that, I couldn't breathe. I could see him sitting in some small room, head down, pen in hand, tears falling on the paper, writing the words he could never send. My hands shook so hard that the paper rustled between my fingers. He said time had taken his youth, but not his regret. He said he lived for the hope that maybe one day I'd forgive him. He said he didn't expect me to understand, but he needed me to know that leaving was never about hate. It was fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of facing the pain he caused. By the time I reached the bottom of that page, I was sobbing. Not because of what he had done, but because of how much he had suffered trying to make it right. 25 years of guilt, all written in a few shaking lines. And I knew then, this letter wasn't just his confession. It was his cry for forgiveness, sent too late, but still heavy with love. The next part of the letter was harder to read. My eyes were already red, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. He wrote about the letters he never sent. He said he had written hundreds over the years, each one beginning with, Dear Dad, and ending the same way. I miss you, but I'm too ashamed to return. He said he kept them in a small box under his bed. He would write one every few months, sometimes every week, whenever the guilt got too heavy to carry. He said those letters became his way of talking to me, even if I never heard the words. He said some nights he'd read them out loud to himself, pretending I was listening. I could almost picture him sitting in a small room, under a dim light, whispering words meant for me, into the silence. That image tore through me. He said he always wanted to send the first one, but every time he sealed an envelope, he got scared. He said the same thought always stopped him. What if Dad doesn't want to hear from me? That single line made my heart ache. I couldn't believe he had spent half his life afraid of his own father's forgiveness. He said he used to imagine how I'd react if the letter came. Would I tear it up? Would I ignore it? Would I hate him more for coming back too late? Those fears kept him trapped in silence for decades. And the cruelest part was that I had been waiting for a single word from him all those years. Two people, both waiting, both hurting, both silent. That was the tragedy of our story. He wrote that sometimes, when the loneliness got too much, he would write and cry at the same time. The tears would fall onto the paper, blurring the words. He said he'd look at the stains and think, maybe this is enough. Maybe he'll feel what I can't say. He said he tried to send one after his mother died. He wrote it the night of her funeral, sitting by a river. He said the letter was long, full of apologies, full of pain. But before sunrise, he tore it into pieces and threw it into the water. He said he watched the paper float away and promised himself he wouldn't bother me again. Reading that, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I dropped the letter on the table and cried into my hands. I kept whispering, "You were never a bother. You were my son." He said he had written on every kind of paper, napkins, notebook pages, receipts, whatever he could find. Some letters were just a few lines, some were pages long. He said sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night and start writing, scared that if he didn't, he'd lose the courage by morning. He said every letter made him feel closer to me, but also reminded him of how far he had gone. He said the words were the only way he could feel like he existed in my life again. He wrote about the last time he moved, said he took all the letters with him, but one night, a storm came and his small apartment leaked. Most of the letters were ruined, soaked, and unreadable. He said he sat on the floor holding the wet pages, crying until there were no tears left. He said watching those letters dissolve felt like losing me all over again. After that, he stopped writing for years. He said he couldn't bear the pain of saying goodbye every time he put his feelings on paper. Then, he wrote something that made me stop breathing for a moment. He said he started writing again recently, not because he thought I'd forgive him, but because he couldn't live with the silence anymore. He said he didn't have much time left, that his health wasn't good. He said he wanted his last letter to reach me, no matter how late it came. "If you're reading this," he wrote, "then I finally did what I couldn't do all these years. I reached you." Those words hit me harder than anything else in that letter. He said he didn't expect me to respond, that maybe I wouldn't even believe it was him. But he said it didn't matter. He just wanted me to know that he loved me. He said that no matter what happened, no matter how long he stayed away, he never stopped being my son. As I read that last part of the page, I realized this wasn't just a confession. It was goodbye. Every word was written like it was his last. Every sentence carried the weight of a lifetime of pain. My chest hurt, my throat burned, and my tears wouldn't stop. I wanted to reach through the paper, hold him, tell him that he was forgiven, that he always had been, but I couldn't. He was far away, lost in time, and this letter was all I had left of him. And then, just as I wiped my eyes and thought the pain couldn't get worse, I saw the next line, the one that froze my heart completely. I thought I had read the worst of it. I thought nothing could hurt me more than knowing my son had spent 25 years living in shame, thinking I stopped loving him. But then I reached the last part of the letter, the final few lines that would stay burned into my mind forever. His handwriting was weaker there, the ink faint, uneven, as if his hands were trembling while writing. He wrote, "Dad, if you're reading this, I want you to know I never stopped waiting for your forgiveness. My eyes froze on those words. I could barely see the rest of the page through my tears. Then came the line that destroyed me completely. Don't try to find me. Just know I never stopped loving you, even when I couldn't face you. I must have read that line 100 times, over and over, each time breaking a little more. Don't try to find me. Why? Was he sick? Was he dying? Was he gone already? The thought made my stomach twist. My breath grew shallow. I pressed the paper against my chest, like holding it could bring him closer. Somehow I kept whispering, "Why didn't you come home? Why didn't you just come back?" But of course the letter couldn't answer. It just sat there, carrying his pain, his voice, his goodbye. For years, I had dreamed of hearing from him, but not like this. Not through words written in shaking ink, not through a farewell hidden between sentences of regret. I had waited for a knock at the door, a phone call, even a stranger saying, "Your son is alive." But all I got was paper. Paper soaked in tears and final words I wanted to scream. I wanted to go out into the street and shout his name like I used to when he was a boy, but my voice wouldn't come. It was trapped inside my chest, choked by grief that had waited too long to escape. He wrote one more line below it. "Please forgive me, Dad. I was never running from you. I was running from myself." That line broke me in half. I had spent years thinking he left out of anger, that he wanted freedom from me, from the life we had. But now I realized he wasn't running away. He was hiding from the guilt he couldn't carry. He wasn't rebelling. He was lost. And the silence between us had turned that confusion into a life sentence for him. I sat there in my kitchen, reading those last words again and again until the ink started to blur under my tears. My hands trembled so much that the letter nearly slipped from my fingers. My heart felt like it was cracking open, every beat heavier than the last. I pressed the paper to my face, trying to breathe through the pain, whispering his name into the air like maybe he could still hear it. The house felt smaller, quieter, colder. The same walls that once echoed with his laughter now echoed with the sound of my sobbing. I looked around and saw the life we had built. The chair he used to sit in, the table where we shared meals, the pictures of him as a boy still hanging on the wall. Everything around me felt like a cruel reminder of what I had lost and what I couldn't get back. I wanted to tear the letter apart, but I couldn't. It was all I had of him, his handwriting, his thoughts, his final message. I folded it carefully, pressing every crease like it was a fragile piece of his soul, then held it against my heart and cried like a man who'd finally run out of strength. 25 years of pain came out in that one night. All the anger, all the confusion, all the waiting. It all collapsed into tears that didn't stop until morning. By the time the sun rose, the house looked different. It wasn't just filled with grief anymore. It was filled with truth. Painful, heartbreaking truth. But truth, nonetheless. My son hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't stopped loving me. He just didn't know how to come back. And though that realization hurt more than anything, it also brought me something I hadn't felt in decades. Peace. But as I sat there, staring at the letter again, I noticed something faint near the bottom corner. It was barely visible, almost hidden under the folds, a few extra words, written smaller, lighter, as if he added them at the last moment. I squinted and brought the paper closer to the light. And that's when I saw it. Another message. One that would send me on a path I never expected. At first, I thought the letter ended with that final goodbye. But when I looked closer, I saw faint marks at the very bottom, almost invisible, like he'd written them with a dying pen or trembling hand. The words were smaller, lighter, hidden below the rest of the text as if he didn't want anyone else to see them. I leaned closer to the lamp, my old eyes straining to make out the letters. And then, slowly, the words became clear. "Go to the graveyard, near Mom's tomb. I left something there for you." My heart jumped. I read it again to make sure I wasn't imagining it, but it was there, his handwriting, faint but real. I sat there frozen, the letter still in my hands, my mind racing. For a long moment, I couldn't move. What did he mean by that? Why the graveyard? Why her grave? My chest tightened with a strange mix of fear and hope. For 25 years, I had been waiting for a sign, anything to prove he was still out there. And now, suddenly, he had left me a message that could mean anything. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold the paper. I felt like I was reading a ghost's instructions. I looked at the clock. It was past midnight. The world outside was quiet, dark, cold. But I couldn't wait until morning. My mind wouldn't let me rest. I put on my coat, grabbed a flashlight, and walked out into the night. The streets were empty, the air biting against my skin. Every step toward that graveyard felt heavy. My heart thudded harder with each one. I hadn't been there since my wife's death anniversary months ago. I knew every path, every turn. But that night it all felt different, as if the air itself was holding its breath. When I reached the gate, it creaked loudly as I pushed it open. The sound echoed through the stillness. The smell of damp earth filled my nose. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, falling on the same path I'd walked hundreds of times before. My wife's grave was near the back, under a large oak tree. The closer I got, the colder it felt. The ground was wet, the leaves rustling softly in the wind. I stopped when I saw her tombstone, her name carved deep. Her picture smiling softly at me from the frame. I whispered her name, as I always did, but that night my voice cracked. Because this time, I wasn't there just for her. I was there for him. I looked around, trying to understand what he could have meant. I left something there for you. My flashlight moved slowly across the ground, the flowers, the stone. Then, near the edge of the grave, I noticed something strange. A small patch of disturbed soil, like someone had dug there recently. My heart started pounding faster. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the cold earth. My hands were shaking, but I started to dig with my fingers. The dirt was soft, easy to move, and after a few moments, I felt something hard beneath the soil. I brushed it off carefully and pulled it out. It was a small, rusted metal box, about the size of a lunch tin. The lid was tight, the edges corroded with age. My fingers trembled as I tried to open it. For a second I thought it was locked, but with a little pressure it gave way, the metal creaking as it opened. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, were several faded photographs, and something else underneath. My flashlight flickered over the faces in the pictures, and my breath caught. They were photos of us, me, my wife, and my son from years ago. Him as a child, smiling. Him with his mother. Him holding his first school certificate. Memories I thought were long gone. I touched the photographs with trembling fingers, my tears falling onto them. Beneath the photos was a small envelope, yellowed with age, and a bundle of money. Thick, wrapped with a rubber band. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a short note written in the same familiar handwriting. "Saved for you, Dad, so you'll never struggle again." I froze. My eyes blurred. The note fell from my hand as I covered my mouth, unable to breathe. He had left this for me. Even after all the years, all the distance, all the guilt, he had been saving for me. I sat there on the cold ground, holding that box against my chest, crying so hard I couldn't see. The money didn't matter. The photos didn't matter. What mattered was that he remembered, that he cared, that even in hiding he had thought of me, prepared something for me, made sure I'd be taken care of. It was his final act of love, quiet, hidden, buried beneath the same earth that held his mother's memory. I looked up at her picture on the tombstone and whispered, "He came back, just like I told you he would." The wind blew gently, moving the leaves around me, and for the first time in years, I felt peace mixed with unbearable pain. He was gone again, but not completely. He had left a part of himself here, something I could hold, something that said, "I still love you." That night, under the cold moonlight, I held that box like a father holding his child again. I don't remember how long I sat there by her grave, holding that rusted box. Time stopped meaning anything. The night air was cold, the kind that cuts through your bones, but I didn't care. My hands were dirty from digging, my knees soaked from the damp ground, but I couldn't move. I kept staring at that small box, the one thing my son had left behind after 25 years of silence. I opened it again, just to be sure I wasn't dreaming. Inside were those photographs, old, worn, faded with age. Yet every face, every smile, every detail looked alive under the flickering beam of my flashlight. It felt like holding pieces of time in my hands. The pictures showed moments I had forgotten. One of them was from his 8th birthday, him with his mother, both smiling at the camera while I stood behind them. Another was of him holding a fishing rod, grinning proudly at the lake. My wife had taken that one. I could almost hear her laughter behind the lens. And there was one more, the three of us sitting together on the porch, my arm around both of them. That photo broke me. We looked happy, whole. Back then, I didn't know that one day I'd be sitting alone in a graveyard, holding that memory while the real thing was long gone. Beneath the photos was that bundle of cash, old bills, tightly packed and wrapped with care. I touched it gently, confused. My son had written, "Saved for you, Dad, so you'll never struggle again." I couldn't understand it at first. Where had he gotten this money? Why would he save it for me instead of using it for himself? I thought about all the years he must have worked, scraping by, living alone, probably skipping meals just to save a few extra dollars. And all that time, while I was here thinking he had abandoned me, he had been thinking about me, providing for me, protecting me from a distance. I pulled the money out, unwrapped the band, and saw small notes tucked between the bills, each one written in his handwriting. They weren't long, just single lines for Dad's medicine, for the house repairs, for the winter. Each line tore through me like a blade. He had planned this. He had thought of everything. Even in his guilt and shame, his heart had never left home. He had lived like a ghost, but every dollar he saved carried a piece of his love. I looked at his mother's grave and whispered through my tears, "He didn't forget us. He never did." The wind blew softly through the trees, and I could almost feel her answer in the rustling leaves, a whisper that said, "I told you he'd come back." For a moment, it felt like the world stood still. The pain, the anger, the waiting. All of it melted into something else, something heavy, but calm. I sat there for hours, holding those pictures against my heart, staring at that box. I remembered every fight we ever had, every harsh word I said when I thought I was teaching him to be strong. I thought about all the nights I waited by the window, too proud to call out his name. I had wanted him to come back on his own, but maybe I should have gone looking for him. Maybe if I had just said, "I forgive you," he wouldn't have spent half his life thinking he wasn't worth it. The guilt hit me all at once. I had lost my son twice. Once when he left, and again when he stopped believing he could come home. When the first light of dawn touched the sky, I finally stood up. My legs were stiff, my eyes swollen, my heart shattered and full. At the same time, I placed the box back down beside her grave, just for a moment, and whispered, "He came home, love. In his own way, he came home." I could almost feel her presence beside me, soft and warm, like she was there watching. Then I picked the box back up, pressed it tightly to my chest, and started the slow walk home. The street was empty, quiet, peaceful. For the first time in 25 years, the silence didn't feel cruel. It felt like closure, like he had finally spoken the words that neither of us could say out loud. When I reached my front door, I looked at the empty chair on the porch and sat down. The sun was rising, light spilling across the garden. I opened the box one last time, spread the photos on my lap, and smiled through my tears. He was gone again, yes, but this time, he hadn't left in anger. He had left love behind, and that love was enough to fill the space he once occupied. That morning, after decades of waiting, I finally stopped looking out the window for him. Because in that moment, I realized he never truly left. He had just found a different way to come home. When I reached home that morning, I placed the rusted box on the table and sat in front of it for a long time. The sun had risen completely now, and the light was spilling through the window onto the photographs, making them glow. I looked at each picture carefully, memorizing every detail, every wrinkle in his clothes, every smile I had missed for so long. My hand still shook, but not from sadness this time, from realization. All these years, I thought my son had forgotten me. I thought he had walked away because he didn't care, but now I knew the truth. He never stopped caring. He was carrying guilt, not hate. He was running from shame, not love. I had punished myself for 25 years, thinking I failed as a father, but maybe he had punished himself more. I looked at his handwriting again on the note. Saved for you, Dad, so you'll never struggle again. I couldn't stop reading that one line he had lived with so little, yet he saved for me. I thought about all those years when I barely had enough to pay the bills after his mother died, all the times I skipped meals to save money, all the nights I slept in cold rooms because I couldn't afford the heater. And all that time, my son was out there, working, collecting every dollar, thinking of me. He had carried his guilt like a cross, and this box was his way of setting it down. I rested my head on the table and cried, not the kind of crying that comes from pain, but from something deeper. It was the cry of a father who finally understood his child. I realized then that love doesn't always return the way we expect it to. Sometimes it doesn't knock on the door. Sometimes it doesn't speak. Sometimes it hides itself in old envelopes, buried boxes, and 25 years of silence. But it's still there, quiet, stubborn, alive. My son had been gone for most of my life, but now I knew he had never really left. His body was away, but his heart was still here, in this house, in these walls, in me. Every year I thought I had lost him. He was thinking of me. Every night I prayed for him. He was probably doing the same somewhere far away. We were never as far apart as I believed. I sat back in the chair and looked around the room. Everything felt different now. The house that had once felt empty suddenly felt full. Not with people, but with presence, his presence. I could almost feel him sitting across from me, smiling shyly the way he used to when he was younger. I spoke softly to the air. I forgive you, son. You don't have to hide anymore. The words came out shaky, but it felt like releasing a lifetime of pain. I didn't know if he would ever hear them, but I said them anyway. Maybe forgiveness isn't about the other person hearing it. Maybe it's about freeing your own heart. The rest of that day passed in silence. I didn't eat much, didn't sleep. I just sat there, looking at the box, feeling both broken and healed at the same time. I knew now that I might never see him again. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he had already passed. Maybe he was still somewhere, too afraid to come back. But that didn't matter anymore. I didn't need to find him. His letter had found me. That was enough. He gave me the one thing I'd been missing for 25 years, an ending. Not a happy one, not a perfect one, but a real one. And that was more than I ever thought I'd get. When the evening came, I went back to the porch. The sky was turning orange, the same color it used to be when we'd sit outside and talk about his future. I held one of the photos in my hand, the one where he's laughing beside his mother. I smiled through my tears and whispered, "You did good, son. You came home in your own way." The wind blew gently, brushing against my face like a soft touch. I looked at the sky and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I realized then that love doesn't always end with goodbye. Sometimes it ends with understanding. My son didn't vanish to hurt me. He vanished because he didn't know how to live with what he'd done. But even from far away, he loved me the only way he could, quietly, faithfully, painfully. And that's all a father could ask for. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Rest now, son. I forgive you." That night, for the first time in decades, I slept without dreams. Not because I stopped missing him, but because I finally knew where he was, not out there in some distant city, but here, in every corner of my home, in every beat of my heart. It's been months since that letter arrived, yet I still keep it on the table beside me, folded neatly with the photographs and that rusted box. Every morning, I sit with my cup of tea and open it again. The paper is worn now, the ink smudged from my tears, but I don't care. It's a part of me. Sometimes I read only the first line. Dad, you must be surprised to hear from me. Other days, I stop at the last. Don't try to find me. I never stopped waiting for your forgiveness. Each word hits differently depending on the day. Some days it hurts, some days it heals. But every time, it reminds me that love doesn't die. It just waits for the right moment to be seen again. I visit the graveyard every Sunday now. I bring flowers for my wife and sit beside her tomb for a while. I talk to her the way I used to when she was alive, quietly, gently. About the things that still linger inside me. I tell her about the letter, the photos, the money, the pain that turned into peace. I tell her that our boy never forgot us, that he loved us till his last breath. Even if that breath was taken somewhere far away, I like to believe she can hear me. The wind always seems to blow a little stronger when I speak his name. Maybe it's her way of saying she knows. Sometimes I still wonder where he is. If he's alive. If he's still out there reading my silence the way I once read his. I've thought about trying to trace the letter, to find a clue, a postmark, a fingerprint, something. But then I stop myself, because he asked me not to look, and I want to respect that. I think he didn't want me to see what life had done to him. Maybe he wanted me to remember him the way he was, smiling, young, hopeful. I'll never know for sure. But I've learned to accept that not every story gets a perfect ending. Some stories end in silence. Some end in a letter that comes 25 years too late. And yet somehow, that's still enough. I keep the rusted box on a shelf now, right above the fireplace. People who visit think it's just an old container with family keepsakes. They don't know what's inside. They don't know that it holds my son's soul. The photos, the notes, the money, they're not just things. They're proof that even broken hearts can find a way to speak again. I touch that box every day before I sleep. It's my way of saying goodnight to him. I whisper the same words I used to tell him when he was little. I'm proud of you, son. I've stopped blaming myself for everything. For years, I carried guilt like it was my shadow. I thought maybe if I'd been softer, he would have stayed. Maybe if I'd said, I love you more, he would have believed it. But life doesn't give us rehearsals. We all make mistakes, and sometimes we pay for them with time we can't get back. I can't change the past, but I can honor what's left. I can live the rest of my days with peace instead of pain. And that's what I'm doing now. One day at a time, one breath at a time. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't erase the hurt, but it makes it bearable. It turns a wound into a scar, something that still shows, but no longer bleeds. My son thought he was too late for forgiveness, but he wasn't. He never was. The moment I held that letter, I forgave him without even thinking. Because how could I not? A father's love doesn't expire. It waits, even when the world moves on. Now, when I look around my quiet home, I don't see emptiness anymore. I see reminders of love that survive distance, silence, and time. The old photos on the wall aren't just memories. They're proof that I had something real, something worth missing. My wife's smile, my son's laughter, they echo here still. This house is no longer lonely. It's full of ghosts, but not the kind that haunt, the kind that hold. I lost a son once to fear, but I found him again through love. And in that, I found myself too. An old man who finally understands that love isn't about being together. It's about never letting go, even when the world forces you apart. My final thought is simple, but it's everything. He vanished to escape my silence, but his love found its way home. And now, when I close my eyes at night, I don't dream of him leaving anymore. I dream of him walking back home, smiling, free, forgiven.